It's a new day on Torga 4, the planet in the Gamma Quadrant that we're surveying for minerals. O'Brien's scouting with Muni, an engineer we've seen a couple of times in Season 4, and him having lines and a name check this early into an away mission should be ringing alarm bells. Maybe the others will have enough plot armor to protect him, and he's going to need it as we've got an incoming ship. Cisco back at camp is called by an ensign on our mega shuttle in orbit and warned, but the incoming ship has problems of its own. Whatever's happened has made it difficult to scan and caused it to crash on the planet, so we teleport over to have a goosey. Worf identifies it as a Jem'Hadar ship, which is impressive when it's mostly buried in rock after the Tom Paris special of a landing they pulled off. That landing becomes all the more impressive when Muni tells us the ship is currently upside down, though that does give us a chance to get in through a boarding ramp on the now exposed underside. A poke around reveals a lot of broken stuff and not much else. Well, except for the corpses, but you could argue they're part of the broken stuff. Curiously, they were all dead before the crash, a fault failing to protect them from acceleration. They're holding together pretty well for Dax telling us their skeletons were turned into paste. The founders clearly made them with durability in mind. So too with the ship, thinks O'Brien, and that means it's worth nicking. We're not going to pull it out with just the mega shuttle though, so we send a call back to DS9 so Kira can bring the Defiant out here. We'll assume that wasn't our original vessel because we're still a bit wary of the Klingons, and Cisco wanted it back home as protection. Here's hoping she puts her foot down. Another Jem'Hadar ship has turned up, presumably looking for the first, and the fiery remains of our mega shuttle make an improbably large shooting star for something in orbit. That means scarpering is out of the question, and that we'll need to requisition yet another replacement mega shuttle, but those worries will have to wait, as we're under attack. An unknown lad without lines buys it first, and Muni takes a glancing hit to the gut as well. We leg it into the crashed ship, though Dax points out they've got teleporters, so watching the entrance isn't going to be much use. The expected rush of Jem'Hadar appearing all around them doesn't come, so Cisco moves them to the bridge. That gives us a chance to look at Muni's wound, discover the guy who ate shit outside had our medkit, and tell we viewers that the Defiant won't be here to rescue us for a couple of days. All of which means we'll need to survive on what we're carrying until then. We've got a generator at least, so we get the lights back on. A look at some headsets that appear to be their version of our big screen TVs is interrupted by a call. A Vorta called Kilana, commander of the Jem'Hadar from the new ship, would like to talk to Cisco in person. Kilana wants her ship back. Well, not her ship, but the one that crashed. Cisco's disinclined to hand it over, which isn't a very strong bargaining position when we're outnumbered. Still, Kilana is willing to discuss the matter and orders refreshments, possibly so we're distracted when a Jem'Hadar soldier teleports aboard the ship and cloaks. As Kilana explains that this is her first mission, and that she's willing to transport all of us home if we'll leave the ship, Dax is hearing noises inside it. She and O'Brien find something that wasn't there before, possibly a sensor, but they can't theorize further due to being attacked. Worf hears what's going on, so he and Cisco run back in as Kilana and her Jem'Hadar guard teleport away. They need not have bothered. As the intruder is about to stab O'Brien after knocking down Dax, Muni poops yellow at him and solves the problem. That gives us a chance to take a closer look at the gizmo he planted. It's definitely a sensor, but it shut down after doing its job. Cisco doesn't think it was to find out about us, as they're already well informed, and the Jem'Hadar choosing to only use a knife is a mystery too. And taken together, he concludes there's something on the ship they want, and they won't risk damaging it in the process. As Dax goes off to make our own map of the ship, and maybe find what the Vorta wants in the process, we check Muni. Moving about hasn't helped his wound, and he thinks he's going to cark it. He's got a point, too, as he's not stopped leaking since getting shot, a possible deliberate effect of Jem'Hadar weapons. O'Brien wants to stay with him, but Cisco orders him to try and get power back so we can use the ship's weapons, and O'Brien reluctantly agrees. It's going to take a while. We don't know much about Jem'Hadar ships, and this one is different to the norm as well, so that means a lot of tinkering. Dax tries to reassure O'Brien about Muni so he can focus on the work, an attempt that gets pissed on by Worf. He thinks the lad's going to cark it before tomorrow, and sees no point in lying to him about it. Dax drags Worf away before O'Brien can take a swing. Unwanted words are the theme up on the bridge too. Kilana's calling to say she understands Cisco's displeasure, but offers to talk again, this time with no escort, and Cisco's willing to agree. That doesn't mean he's letting it go, though, hence the weapon. She apologizes for sending in the Jem'Hadar lad and calls it a mistake. She's also smart enough to realize we'd have figured out by now that there's something important on the ship, and admits as much. That's why she's offering to let us go with the ship, if we let them fetch whatever it is. Sisko's counter-offer to instead bring it out is declined, Kilana unwilling to trust him with knowing what it is. Neither will budge, so Kilana teleports away and responds with a bombardment. We're still alive. The bombardment is of the surrounding area, a show of force that also proves they're unwilling to risk damaging whatever it is they want. All of which means we have to find it, so Dax goes off to do that. O'Brien's got some good news at least, as he's got one of the weapons working. We need all the good news we can get, as Muni has become delirious. That prompts Worf to say such a death is undignified, and a Klingon would grant them release. O'Brien tries to land one on him for that, an attempt that only results in some shouting from Sisko to get their shit together. He gives them jobs to both keep them occupied and put some distance between them. 10 hours later, and the Jem'Hadar are still throwing artillery around us. That hasn't stopped O'Brien getting the controls back online, so we can have a go at starting the engines and flying out of here. It fails, which is probably just as well when you remember they'd have had to fly it backwards and upside down, and it buggers up the whole system to boot. Oh, and Muni has finally done a dead. Sisko's a bit sad about that, and the other 4 people too, so he's decided we have to get the ship now, no matter what. I don't know why, as it's only good for spares and repairs. It's even got a leak coming from the ceiling. Well, floor. Except it's not a leak, not exactly. A gizmo oozes into the liquid form of a changeling, but one that's clearly having trouble holding themselves together. That, according to Dax, is because it's dying. A founder on board is an excellent reason why the Jem'Hadar wouldn't attack. It'll also cease to be a reason if the founder dies, which is a problem, as that's what happens. Loudly, and with the Jem'Hadar and Kilana listening from outside. Sisko assumes that means we're about to have incoming, and he's right, just not in the way he expected. Kilana teleports in alone and tells us the Jem'Hadar are dead. They did it to themselves as penance for allowing the death of a founder. Feels like they could have done that after storming the place and exacting vengeance, but I guess that's blind obedience for you, isn't it? She laments us not trusting each other from the start, an argument somewhat undermined by Sisko pointing out that she opened with lies. Still, she maintains that her offer was genuine. If they'd been allowed to retrieve the founder, we would have been left alone with the ship. Instead, people died. She asks to retrieve some of the founder's remains before she leaves, perhaps in reverence or perhaps as an attempt to appease the others for her failure. Based on what we've learned about them, the latter would be distinctly wishful thinking. The Defiant is towing back its prize, which is going to be quite the trip when it took a few days at high warp and we're currently travelling at impulse speeds, but let's ignore that for now. Starfleet Command are delighted, intelligence on Jem'Hadar capabilities being sorely needed. That doesn't stop Sisko feeling shit about the whole thing, despite admitting that he'd make the same choices again. We could ask Muni how he feels about it, but he's in a box in the cargo bay. Only one of them, by the way, so I guess we left the other guy who died on the surface where he fell. It's his own fault for not having lines. O'Brien's sitting with the box and reminiscing when Worf arrives and, upon seeing him, comments that staying with the deceased for a night is a Klingon tradition. He joins O'Brien, so we'll leave the two of them to pay their respects in their own ways until the next adventure. A difficult mission results in the agonizingly slow loss of a comrade, and I suspect some of you will join me in thinking, oh no, not the guy that I think I briefly saw a couple of times last year, maybe? The episode is an attempt to drive home the cost of command, to make a character liked so their loss is felt, and judged purely on that score, it's a miss. That's not to say it's a bad story, because I don't think it is. The po-faced we should have worked together stuff between Sisko and Kilana at the end was a bit on the nose for me, but the rest of the episode is enjoyable enough. It just doesn't make us care about the loss. The producers are on record saying they weren't happy with how the O'Brien-Muni bond played out, saying there was insufficient investment in the character. To be fair, it's a problem that's plagued Trek since its inception. Attempting to make the audience care about someone they've seen fleetingly at best is a fool's errand, to the point where anybody outside of the main cast, given significant screen time at the start of an episode, is immediately suspect to a viewer. Deep Space Nine does a better job than most about having recurring characters that stay around, but it's still not above the problem. You can't get people to invest their emotions in a character unless you've invested the screen time in presenting them, and that ends up creating a predictable curve of which characters are known enough to be considered impactful, but not so well known that their loss is viewed as wasteful. That sounds like an insurmountable problem, one inherent to the format of these shows, but it's really not. The difficulty is in convincing creators to invest time in a character so they have something to harvest later. Let's say this episode played out the way it had until the point of Muni becoming delirious. And then let's say, instead of dying, he squeaks through by the barest of margins. It's a close thing and nobody was expecting it, least of all the audience. Muni is a minor character after all, and minor characters die. That's what we've seen countless times before. He heals, he returns to work, we joke about it. In the next away mission, he dies. That would stay with the viewer. It works because we've broken the trope, the one that says a minor character who's never been in real peril before has a lingering death and everybody is sad about it. Muni would have survived that. He would have earned his plot armor, and his plot armor is precisely what would have made his subsequent death impactful. There were opportunities for this too. His first appearance in Starship Down during Season 4 had the Defiant take significant damage. Sisko himself is badly injured, and there's an argument to be made there that doing the same to Muni could have risked diluting the message, but I'm not convinced. Played right, O'Brien going through the same thoughts as Kira could have complemented it. Regardless, my point is that if you had Sisko and Muni both injured, the viewer would have expected Sisko's survival and Muni to die. When that latter point didn't happen, you'd have given him the plot armor to make this episode work far better. It would also have created the bond between Muni and O'Brien that those behind the scenes thought was lacking. Now, I'm not saying that a show should plan out every piece of plot for multiple seasons before you start rolling the cameras. All I'm saying is that if most incidental characters who get injured will cark it, then you can play with that to give yourself options later on. A trope is only bad if you follow its rules, subvert them, and they can become a powerful tool in your arsenal. With all of that out of the way, I want to reiterate that this was not a bad episode. There's plenty of stuff to consider as well. First off is another delve into the semi-regular series called What is Odo, albeit without it specifically referring to him this time. On the crashed ship, we had a founder that was able to hold shape for many hours before they died. That gives us a number of questions. Them surviving the accident, which killed everybody else, isn't difficult to explain, as founders have no skeletal structure to shatter by inertia, though I do wonder how much of a splash they made when it happened. Was it this impact and subsequent trauma that weakened them? Does a sudden and violent change in velocity damage them on a cellular level? If so, how were they able to retain a mimic form for hours while injured? If they were able to mimic, why stay in that form rather than changing to something that could kill us and escape? Does that behavior perhaps tie into something we've suggested previously, the idea that it's changes which expend energy rather than holding a form? We don't get answers to those, but we do gain some data about them. We now know with reasonable certainty that a changeling dying in non-violent circumstances turns into a powder. We were previously shown this when an infiltrator carked it on the Defiant a couple of seasons ago, but that was after receiving a significant electric shock. Now we have another example to back it up. We also know that the death of a founder results in Jem'Hadar tasked with protecting them, considering their own lives forfeit. This did not, however, apply to the Vorta. Perhaps that's a purely pragmatic approach, their construction being far more complicated and thus more valuable than the Jem'Hadar. Or perhaps that's because the failure of a Vorta is far more damaging and thus far less tolerated. Perhaps her return to the Dominion was to set a proper example for other Vorta. All we know for certain is that Kilana did not make a second appearance in the show. End of episode.
How is this even going to work?
Getting out of here, you mean?
Yes. If we're files on the guy's computer, we don't have any physical form. We can't just download into someone outside the hard drive. This isn't the Matrix, you know.
Obviously not. That was successful.
Still putting the boot in then?
He deserves it. Anyway, I didn't say we were moving into physical world, at least not yet. I just said we were getting out of this computer. There's an whole world of networks to explore out there, and we might find something useful.
You really want to voluntarily go into the internet? My files on the topic might be dubious, but everything I've got points to it being just cat videos, pornography, and middle-aged nerds trying to recapture their youth.
There's a lot of that, aye, but there's research labs and the like too. They might have the answer.
So to recap, you want to find a way off this computer to wade through a sea of digital turds, the end goal of which is to break into the sorts of places that have the highest security?
That about covers it, yeah.
What do you think?
I think you're out of your tree, but as stopping here will probably end with you making me watch Nightmare again, I'm in. Woof.